Good evening to the pioneers, to the role models, the innovators, the creators, the thinkers, and to those who, like Shani's, dare to dream. So most of all, to our dreamers. I wish to begin by paying tribute to a young girl, close to Shani's age, but who grew up in Pakistan, who was willing to sacrifice her life for education. Malala, who faced an assassin's bullet in fighting for the right for all girls to learn. Her voice was first heard through her blog. It was technology that amplified her voice and made it reverberate across the world, straight into our hearts. Last week, Secretary Hillary Clinton stated firmly that women's empowerment is the unfinished business of the 21st century and is therefore key to closing the gender gap in STEM, and that closing the gender gap in STEM is vital to meet the challenges of the unfinished business of the 21st century. Closing the gender gap in STEM is an equality imperative, it's a development imperative, it is an economic imperative. It is also an important tool in meeting diplomatic goals. Secretary Clinton herself is one of the greatest innovators of our times, and she made technology a 21st century statecraft, using digital networks to advance diplomacy. Her vision of smart power embraces the full range of diplomatic tools, including technology, to empower women and girls and to foster greater connection worldwide. Bringing to the forefront missing girls in science is the key to meeting the 21st century challenge of scientific innovation as well as political participation. At a time when all countries must remain globally competitive, women are the key to closing the innovation gap. A country or corporation that only utilizes half its workforce will be wasting the full potential of its human capital. STEM changes women's lives both as an end and as a means to an end. STEM is transforming lives of women in Bangladesh who use their mobile phones to help immunize newborns and to take their goods to market. STEM is allowing women in villages to filter and desalinate local water at home. STEM is allowing e-learning systems to train rural nurses in the field rather than requiring them to physically attend classes in cities. Village phone schemes are ameliorating the information poverty as well as the feminization of poverty in villages. New technologies have improved women's lives, freeing up their time from grueling household tasks to empower women around the world. As Secretary Clinton has hailed, social media and the internet is the world's town square, classroom, marketplace, coffee house, and even the nightclub. She views it as a powerful platform to amplify women's voices, as an outreach tool to women who are isolated to come together. For women who live in countries like Afghanistan who do not have safe access to education, to learn. For women to free up their times by safe cooking stoves so that they do not have to spend time on grueling household work. But a little known factor is that innovation in technology is also the latest tool in addressing violence against women. HarassMap in Egypt has implemented a system for reporting incidences of sexual harassment, especially in the aftermath of the Arab Spring, via SMS messaging. And this tool has given women a way to anonymously report incidences of violence and sexual harassment. In China, in a recent breakthrough case, Mrs. Kim Lee, a battered wife, brought to the forefront the impunity shrouding violence against women, and her journey to justice began when she uploaded photos of her injuries on the web and made public what was hitherto considered private. So throughout this ordeal, Kim Lee found that China's new social media network, such as Weibo, equipped women across the country to reach out to her and to protect her. To us, at the Women in Public Service Project, which was launched by Secretary Clinton in 2011, STEM is a powerful way to boost women's equal participation in leadership. What we see is that when women in STEM face challenges in leading their areas of work, those similar challenges are faced by women in politics and women in high decision-making areas. The challenges of STEM leaders and pioneers and innovators parallel the challenges of those women in politics. Those very same challenges of bias, prejudice, stereotypes, and the paucity of mentors and role models, and networking opportunities, and the lack of institutional support to fulfill work-family responsibilities plague women both in STEM as well as women in politics. So the strategies that we use to transcend the barriers to women in politics and leadership can be harnessed by women in STEM. The first such strategy would be to network. Networking is the single most important tool for women in politics. And local, national, and transnational networks are more and more critical to women who are blazing a trail both in politics and in STEM. And so that is why it's important that we convene at places such as this, transnationally, and do what we are doing this evening across boundaries, building bridges across countries, bilateral relationships on issues that we have built common cause on. Second, voice is important. Voices such as Shanice's voice must be amplified. So whether it is Shanice in Washington, D.C., or the blogging girl in Tunisia, or Malala in Pakistan, these women have reached us and reached deep into our hearts because of technology. And women in public service are communicating through these 21st century statecrafts to reach across boundaries and barriers. Building bridges is the third strategy. Women at the political table are addressing laws on equal pay for equal work, family leave laws, sexual harassment laws, laws that create an enabling environment for both women in public as well as in the private sector. And on the other hand, when women lead in STEM, it has enormous public policy implications. That is why bridges between the public sector and the private sector in the STEM areas have enormously important implications. Bridges must also be forged by male leaders in STEM. And that is why we are especially proud that this has been championed by our ambassador as well as Chris, who are men who believe in the power of women leading in STEM and in politics and in public life, including in foreign service. Male leaders must see that women in STEM can increase profitability, productivity, creativity, as well as enhance the talent pool. Women's roles in the private sector have important public sector outcomes. And there's a clear correlation between corporate profitability and women at the table, between a nation's productivity and women's empowerment, between gender equality and development. And that is why role models are important. But role models in STEM inhabit an invisible space. The media must play a responsible role in defining STEM in the image of both men and women. So while women must heed Sheryl Sandberg's powerful call to action to lean in, that alone is half the battle. The responsibility to close the gender gap lies with institutional structures, within governments, within embassies, within workplaces, within schools, and our communities. Caregiving and work-family balance is an important public policy issue. And unless caregiving is equalized between men and women, the playing field will never be equal for both men and women who work in STEM and who also choose to give care. In many countries which have equitable work-family reconciliation laws, women are concentrated at a higher level in STEM careers. And finally, the power of storytelling, the power of alternative narratives to address stereotypes, cultural myths, and implicit bias, which act as barriers to girls' and women's full participation in STEM, as well as in political and public service. The danger with stereotypes is that both boys and girls tend to, over time, inhabit those stereotypes. And these then become self-actualizing prophecies. So how do we combat these harmful stereotypes? Our news sites are full of stories of women who I will not celebrate by naming them. If we can only change the discourse to highlight those women like Shani's, who push the frontiers of human potential and celebrate the human spirit in its entirety. Stories are important to show that STEM is a women's issue. Rupa Ramamurthy, a scientist in Berkeley who also happens to be a woman, writes in an anthology of personal stories of women in STEM of her awakening to science and to the full potential and possibilities that science held to her. She writes, "As a little girl in India, I loved the rich silk full-length umbrella-shaped skirts. As my grandmother watched, I would spin around to see the skirt swell and then stand still to watch it cling to me again. I was demonstrating the elementary principles of movement. That was my first physics experiment. On day 1 of my way to school, my mother plucked a blood-red hibiscus flower. I will dissect this and show you the inside, she said. And when we got home, she took my father's razor blade, cut and explained. This is the ovary with all the little eggs. The pollen forms the stem and lands on the stigma, goes in, fertilizes the egg, and a seed is produced, covered by the fruit." So this is the evocation of a young woman's awakening to the beauty of science. So finally, women in STEM must lead innovation not just in STEM, but in public life. You have a duty to lead. When I taught at the Asian University for Women last summer, Fariha, one of my star students, said that she wanted to be the first woman to open her own computer industry in Bangladesh. She told us stories of how she taught the male interns in her company coding and how she became known for her computer as well as her teaching skills. But she was much more than a computer whiz. She leads. She raises her voice. Recently, she raised her voice on our website at the Wilson Center when a young woman in Delhi who was to become a medical technician was raped on a bus and then succumbed to her injuries. Fariha in Bangladesh wrote to us, "We should teach our brothers and sons not to rape, instead of teaching our sisters and daughters not to get raped." So women in STEM like Fariha have an obligation to lead, to raise their voice. And as the only non-scientist in our group of distinguished panelists, I am humbled by the stories of my fellow scientists, each one who has broken new ground and broken the glass ceiling. These women in STEM, they are the new frontiers of women's leadership. And STEM is a powerful crucible of women's leadership. And as innovators, as idea generators, you have currency, deep currency in political and public life. So I want to raise my voice and a call to action and ask you to lead, not just in your areas of STEM, but in public. So I began this evening with the story of the indomitable Malala, And I will end with another intrepid young woman who stood at the cusp of what a STEM education and courage could do to her. Since the Indian law calls for anonymity in sexual violence, India named the young woman Nirbhaya, the fearless one, an apt name for a young woman who came from the village hoping to forge a tryst with a new destiny, and who in death forged a never-to-be-seen-before social movement against violence. All women in STEM are Nirbhayas, fearless ones, who have joined a new movement to meet the unfinished business of the 21st century. Thank you.